In October of 2015, a man was working alone in a remote patch of forest in western Maine. He wasn't a hiker. He wasn't searching for anything. He was a contractor doing a survey of the land. Thick, tangled woods, no trail, the kind of place almost nobody walks through on purpose. And in the middle of all that nothing, he found something. He found a tent, collapsed, half swallowed by the undergrowth, the kind of thing your eye almost slides right past. But there was something inside it. There was a body inside, a woman, and she had been dead for more than 2 years.
Now, I want you to slow down with me here, because the obvious assumption is the wrong one. This woman did not wander off into some untouched wilderness 100 miles from the nearest road. She vanished off the Appalachian Trail, a marked footpath, a trail that around 3 million people walk every single year. And when she went missing, this wasn't a quiet little disappearance that nobody noticed. It triggered one of the largest search operations in the entire history of the state of Maine. Helicopters in the air, specialized dog teams on the ground, hundreds of trained people walking grid lines through the forest calling her name for days. Some of those searchers walked within 100 yards of where she was sitting. 100 yards, and not one of them found her. She was barely half a mile from the trail, and she stayed hidden in that spot for over 2 years. So I need you to sit with the question that pulled me into this whole thing. How? How does a careful, prepared, experienced hiker step off a marked trail that millions of people walk and simply dissolve into the air? How do search dogs, animals bred and trained for this exact job, pass a football field away and catch nothing? And I'm telling you right now, before we go any further, the answer is so much stranger and so much smaller than you are expecting. Because the thing that actually killed this woman wasn't a bear, it wasn't a cliff, it wasn't a person. It was something so ordinary, so completely unremarkable, that every single person watching this video has done it 100 times without a second thought. And here's the part that genuinely unsettles me, the part I keep coming back to at night. She is not the only one this trail has done this to. She's just the one we can explain. The trail has been swallowing people for almost a century, and most of them never got an answer at all, because the second you start pulling on this one thread, it stops looking like a single woman's terrible run of luck. It starts looking like something the Appalachian Trail has been doing quietly, patiently for generations. People walk onto this trail and are never seen again. That alone you could maybe explain. It's 2,000 miles of mountains. But it's the details that don't sit right. Some of these people are found in places that had already been searched. Searched carefully, more than once. There are stretches of this trail where hikers report their compasses spinning, refusing to settle. And the disappearances are not scattered evenly across those 2,000 miles. They cluster, the same handful of mountains, the same cursed little pockets, over and over and over. And here is the detail that I cannot get out of my head. The people who lived on this land long before any trail was blazed, centuries before us, they knew about those exact spots. They named them, they warned about them, they told their children to stay away. And we paved a footpath right through the middle of them and called it a national treasure. Every one of the cases I'm about to show you got filed under the same single word: accident, every time. And maybe that word is honest, maybe it's true in every case, but I want to know if it's the whole truth. So let's start where this started for me, with the woman they found in the collapsed tent. Her name was Geraldine Largay, Jerry to the people who loved her. And I want to be clear about who she was, because it matters more than anything else in this first part of the story. If Jerry had been some overconfident beginner who showed up in sneakers with a phone full of selfies and no idea what she was doing, this whole tragedy would make a sad, simple kind of sense. People underestimate the wilderness constantly. The wilderness corrects them. That's a story we've all heard before. But that is the exact opposite of who Jerry Largay was. She was 66 years old, a retired nurse, a woman who had spent her whole career staying calm and competent while other people fell apart. And before that, she had served in the Air Force. This was not a woman who panicked. This was not a woman who cut corners. She had spent months physically training for this hike, loading up a pack and walking for hours to get her body ready for the punishment of the trail. She studied, she prepared, she did it the right way. Out on the trail, the other long-distance hikers had a name for her the way they do for everyone. They called her Inchworm because she was slow. Steady, careful, methodical, never fast. But here's the thing about an inchworm. It never stops. It just keeps moving forward, one careful step at a time, until it gets where it's going. And she wasn't even truly alone out there. Her husband George was her partner in the whole endeavor. He followed her route by car, and at every single road crossing where the trail met a highway, George would be waiting. Fresh food, dry clothes, a real bed for the night. They had a rhythm, a system, and in all the weeks they had been running it up the East Coast, that system had never failed them once, not one time. So I need you to hold one tiny, almost invisible detail, because a friend named Jane, who had hiked the earlier stretch of the trail alongside Jerry, later told investigators something. She mentioned it quietly, almost in passing. She said that Jerry sometimes struggled with reading a map and using a compass. And I know that sounds like nothing. A footnote, a throwaway line. Trust me, by the time we reach the end of this, that one small sentence is going to be the most important thing anyone said about this entire case. So, here it is. The small, ordinary, almost embarrassingly mundane thing that killed an experienced, prepared, careful woman. On the morning of July 22nd, 2013, somewhere in the remote western mountains of Maine, Geraldine Largay stepped off the trail to go to the bathroom. That's it. That is the entire thing. She walked a short distance off the path into the trees for a moment of privacy, the most human, forgettable act imaginable. And when she finished and turned around to walk back, the trail was gone. Now, if you have never stood inside dense northeastern forest, I understand how absurd that sounds. How do you lose a marked trail that is, 50 feet behind you? But that's the trap. That kind of forest does not work the way you picture it. The undergrowth is so thick, the trees so close, that visibility collapses to almost nothing. 50 feet in every single direction looks exactly the same. There is no landmark, there is no path, there is just green in every direction forever. The trail you walked in on might as well have never existed. And here is where you start to understand what kind of woman Jerry was. Because she did not panic. She did the smart thing, the trained thing. She stopped and she pulled out her phone to text for help. At 11:01 that morning, she carefully typed out a message to George. Something close to, "I'm lost, can you call the warden service?" And she pressed send. It didn't send. She tried again. It didn't send. The next day, thinking clearly, she climbed to higher ground, the place you'd logically expect to catch a signal. And she tried again. Nothing. The message just sat there, undelivered, glowing on a screen in the middle of the wilderness. Over the days that followed, Jerry tried to reach the outside world, 11 separate times, 11 text messages, 11 attempts to pull a lifeline across the gap, and every single one of them failed to send. Not one of them got through to anybody. So now you have a new question gnawing at you, and it should be, why? Why would a normal modern cell phone in the year 2013 fail to send a single one of 11 text messages over multiple days from multiple locations? That is not normal. Hold on to that, because the answer is one of the cruelest parts of this entire story. We are going to get there, but not yet. Here is the part of this case that's almost nobody knows, and it is the part that changes everything. Jerry did not die that first day. She didn't die that first week. Geraldine Largay survived out there, alone, lost in that forest for nearly a month. And for almost that entire time, while she was alive, while she was waiting, while she was rationing her food and praying for rescue, searchers were moving through the woods around her, sometimes close, sometimes very close. Let me give you the scale of what was happening on the other side of that wall of trees. When George got to a road crossing and Jerry never appeared, he knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong, because their system never failed. He raised the alarm, and the response was enormous. The Maine Warden Service launched one of the largest, most intensive searches in the state's history. Aircraft flew grid patterns overhead. Dog teams worked the forest floor. Hundreds of people, professionals and volunteers, walked shoulder to shoulder through the brush, calling her name into the green. And at the closest point, they came within roughly 100 yards of her camp, the length of a football field. You could throw a stone that far, and they walked right past the dogs, animals whose entire purpose, whose entire training is to find the scent of a living human being lost in exactly this situation. Caught nothing. Smelled nothing. Walked on. How? How is that physically possible? I promise you there is a real grounded answer to that question. And honestly, when you hear it, it's worse than the supernatural version your brain is reaching for right now. Hold it. And here's how we know all of this. How we know how long she survived. How we know what she was doing. How we even know that she heard them. We know because Jerry kept a journal. Day after day, alone in that camp, she wrote it down. All of it. She wrote about rationing the small amount of food she had. She wrote about her attempts to signal for help. She built herself a little camp, and she tried with everything a 66-year-old retired nurse had in her to stay alive long enough to be found. And at a certain point, and this is the detail that I genuinely struggle to read out loud, Jerry understood where this was heading. So she tore a page out of her journal and she wrote a note. Not to be rescued, a note for whoever would eventually find her body. She asked that they please tell her husband, George, and her daughter what had happened to her. She wrote that it would be a kindness for them to know. No matter, she wrote, how many years from now, no matter how many years from now, she knew. Sitting in that camp, listening to a forest that would not give her up, she already understood that she might not be found for a very long time. And she was right. It was over 2 years. So sit with this. She did everything right. She prepared, she trained, she stayed calm, she didn't panic, she rationed, she signaled, she survived for almost a month. And doing everything right still was not enough. Why? Why did all of that competence still end in a collapsed tent? Hold that one too. We're almost there. Okay, let's start paying off some of these debts. Let's start with the most impossible one. How an army of trained searchers and trained dogs failed to find a living woman who was 100 yards away, calling out for days. And the frustrating, almost unbearable answer is that it's real, it's knowable, it's not a portal or a creature, it's a stack of small, ordinary, terrible pieces of bad luck, each one stacking on the last. The forest in that specific area is staggeringly, unusually dense, the kind of cover where you genuinely cannot see a person crouched 20 feet away. Rain fell during the critical early days of the search, and rain is the enemy of scent. It likely washed away the very trails the dogs needed to follow. And the search grid itself, the map of where to look, was built around an assumption about which way Jerry had traveled. An assumption that, it turns out, was wrong. They were looking hard in slightly the wrong place. So that explains the searchers, called comfort, but it explains them. What it does not explain, what it cannot explain, is where she was found. Because of all the places along 2,000 miles of the Appalachian Trail that Geraldine Largay could have ended up, the spot where she made her final camp, the spot where she died, sits on land belonging to a United States Navy survival training facility, a SERE site. Sit with that. SERE, survival, evasion, resistance, escape is the program the American military uses to teach its own people how to survive being lost, alone, and without supplies in hostile wilderness. It is the single patch of forest in that entire region specifically set aside to teach human beings how not to die exactly the way Jerry died. Jerry Largay died of being lost and alone in the woods, on the exact ground the military uses to train people in how not to be lost and alone in the woods. I am not going to stand here and tell you what that means. I genuinely do not know what it means. It is almost certainly a coincidence, but I have tried and I cannot make it feel like nothing. And the texts. Now, finally, we can close that loop. That entire stretch of trail sits inside what's called a dead zone. No cell coverage, none. Her phone, with all its bars and its modern technology, was never going to send a single one of those 11 messages because there was simply nothing out there for it to talk to. The one device that would have saved her life, a satellite messenger, a little unit that bounces a signal off a satellite in space instead of begging for a cell tower that isn't there, was the one piece of equipment she didn't carry. That is the entire margin. That is the gap between a rescue and a body in a tent. That is the small, ordinary, devastating thing.
So we did it. We actually solved the case, no? We have a real cause, a real chain of events, and a real answer. A wrong turn, a dead zone, a missing device, a stretch of impossibly thick forest, and a search grid pointed the wrong way. Tragic, human, but explainable. Except, and here's where this stops being one sad story and starts being something that genuinely disturbs me. This is the only person on this trail we can solve.
And the only reason we can solve her is that she left a record. She wrote it down. She handed us the answer from inside her own tent, which forces a question I cannot let go of. If this, a journal, a timeline, a cause of death, an actual answer is what happened to the one who left us a record, then what in God's name happened to all the ones who left nothing at all? Because they are out there. In 1946, a college student walked onto this same trail system in broad daylight, wearing a bright red coat that you could see from a quarter mile away. 1,000 people searched for her. They never found one single trace. Not a coat fiber, not a footprint, nothing. So I have to ask the question that the official files never quite answer. Why does this keep happening in the same place? To understand that question, I have to take you to one very specific stretch of the trail in southern Vermont. And there's a geographical fact here that makes all of this fit together, so stay with me. Through this part of Vermont, the Appalachian Trail and an older, more rugged path called the Long Trail run together, the same ground, and they run straight across a mountain named Glastonbury. And between 1945 and 1950, just 5 years, in a tight little radius around that one mountain, 5 people vanished. 5. People eventually gave the area a name. They called it the Bennington Triangle. And I want to walk you through these one at a time because each one is somehow stranger than the last, and together they stop feeling like a coincidence. Let's start with the woman in the red coat because she's the most famous. Her name was Paula Weldon. She was 18 years old, a student at a nearby college. On a December afternoon, she decided to go for a hike on the long trail, the same trail system, that same overlap. Witnesses saw her on the path. She asked another couple how much farther the trail went, and then she walked around a bend into the gathering dusk, and she was never seen again. The search for Paula Weldon was massive. Over 1,000 people, aircraft, a reward posted, bloodhounds, and they recovered absolutely nothing. No body, no coat, no clue. How do you lose an 18-year-old girl in a bright red coat on a marked trail in plain view with 1,000 people looking? Her disappearance was so badly handled, so total, that it directly led to the creation of the Vermont State Police. That is how thoroughly this mountain erased her. But here's what most people don't realize. Paula wasn't the first. She wasn't even the strangest. A year earlier, in 1945, a man named Midi Rivers vanished on that same mountain. And Midi was no lost tourist. He was 74 years old, and he was an expert woodsman, a hunting guide who knew those mountains better than almost any living person. He was leading a small group of hunters back toward camp. He got a little bit ahead of them on the trail, the way an experienced man does. They came around the bend behind him, and he was simply gone. The only thing anyone ever found of Midi Rivers was a single rifle cartridge lying in the water of a stream. The man who knew these woods best was the very first the woods took. So ask yourself, why him? Why would the one person who couldn't get lost be the one who disappears without a trace? And then the pattern stops making even that kind of grim sense. Because in 1949, a man named James Tedford disappeared too. And James Tedford was on a bus, a moving bus. He was a passenger riding home, and other passengers confirmed he was aboard between the last two stops. When the bus pulled into Bennington, his seat was empty. His belongings were still sitting on the luggage rack above it. An open bus timetable was reportedly still on the seat where he'd been. There is no dense forest to blame here, no wrong turn off a trail, no dead zone. A man vanished from inside a moving vehicle, surrounded by other people, and was never seen again. And then there is Frida Langer, and Frida's case is the one that ties a cold knot in my stomach because of how it connects back to Jerry. In 1950, Frida was hiking near the mountain with her cousin. She slipped and fell into a stream, got soaked, and told her cousin she was going to head back to their camp, a short, familiar walk, to change into dry clothes. She never arrived at the camp. She simply never came out of those woods. For 2 solid weeks, hundreds of people searched. They found nothing, and then 7 months later, her body was found in an open field, out in the open, in an area that searchers had walked across repeatedly in the months between her disappearance and the discovery. By the time she was found, her body was too decomposed for anyone to determine how she had died. Searched ground. Again, stop and count with me. That is now the second time Jerry Largay and Frida Langer, decades and hundreds of miles apart, that this trail hid a human body in plain sight, in a place that the searchers had already covered. The same impossible detail twice, and it will not be the last time you hear it tonight. And this is where I have to talk about the folklore. And I want to be careful and honest with you here, because this part is real, it's documented, it's recorded history, but it is not mine to interpret, and I'm not going to pretend to be an authority on it. I'm just going to tell you what is on the record. The Abenaki, the people who lived on this land for countless generations before any of these names ended up in a newspaper, they had a relationship with Glastonbury Mountain. And that relationship was avoidance. They considered the mountain cursed. They did not hunt on it. They did not build on it. They did not camp on it. According to the accounts that survive, they used that mountain for exactly one purpose. They buried their dead at its base. That was it. A place for the dead and nothing else. And there is a specific old legend tied to that mountain. A story of an enchanted stone somewhere on the slopes. A stone that would open up and swallow anything unfortunate enough to step on it. Now, I do not believe there is a literal hungry rock-eating hikers on a mountain in Vermont. Let me say that as plainly as I can. But listen to what that legend is actually describing. It's describing a specific place on a specific mountain where people step and are never seen again. Strip away the magic and the Abenaki were telling us the same thing the disappearance records tell us. Don't go up there. People don't come back and it doesn't stop with the Abenaki. For well over a century, the area around that mountain has generated the same cluster of reports again and again from completely unconnected people. Strange lights moving through the trees, strange sounds with no source. And there it is again, compasses that spin and refuse to point north. The exact detail that turns up on these cursed stretches of trail over and over. People wandering in circles because the one tool that's supposed to save them quietly stops working.
So I keep landing on the same question and I can't shake it loose. Why here? Why does this one mountain, flagged as cursed by the people who knew it best, keep doing this across centuries, across totally different kind of people? A hunter, a student, a man on a bus, a woman changing her clothes. What is it about this specific ground?
And if you think this is just one weird mountain in Vermont, one statistical fluke we've blown up into a legend, then I need to take you 600 miles south to another stretch of the same trail, the Great Smoky Mountains. And I need to tell you about a day in June of 1969 and a little boy named Dennis Martin. Dennis was 6 years old. He was in the Smokies with his family on a Father's Day weekend trip, a tradition, something they did together. And this was not a family of careless tourists either. The Martins were experienced. They knew these mountains. They've been coming here for years. In the early evening, near a place called Spence Field, right along the Appalachian Trail, the kids were playing a game, a harmless game. Some of the boys, including little Dennis, decided to sneak around through the brush to jump out and surprise the adults. A prank. Dennis, in his red shirt, slipped off into the bushes to circle around. The other boys went the other way. It took a matter of seconds. When the adults looked, the other boys popped out, but Dennis didn't. He never came around. In the span of a few minutes, on a clear evening, on a marked trail, 6-year-old Dennis Martin had vanished as completely as if the mountain had inhaled him. And what happened next is one of the largest, most desperate search operations in the history of American wilderness. This was not a casual look around. Rangers, hundreds, then thousands of volunteers, helicopters, and here's a detail that tells you how seriously they took it. They brought in Green Berets, United States Army Special Forces, soldiers trained to track and survive in any terrain on Earth, were brought in to search for a 6-year-old boy in the Smoky Mountains. And then the mountain did what it does. The weather turned. Heavy storms rolled in and hammered the search area, washing out the ground, destroying any scent for the dogs, turning the trails to mud, and erasing whatever trace Dennis might have left. Sound familiar? Rain killing the scent at exactly the wrong moment. The same detail that doomed Jerry Largay 44 years earlier and 600 miles north. They searched for weeks, thousands of people, soldiers, aircraft, dogs, and they found nothing. Not a shoe, not a scrap of that red shirt. Not a single confirmable trace of Dennis Martin was ever found. He is to this day simply gone. And there is one more detail in the Dennis Martin case that I have to give you, because it is the kind of thing that keeps you up. That same evening, miles away from Spence Field, a different family hiking in the Smokies reported hearing something. An enormous, sickening scream cutting through the woods, and one of them reported seeing a rough-looking man moving through the trees, carrying something over his shoulder. The leads went nowhere. They were never connected to anything. They just sit there in the file, unexplained, a scream and a shape in a forest that swallowed a child whole. So now tell me it's one weird mountain. A 6-year-old in a red shirt, gone in seconds, in heavy traffic terrain, hunted by green berets, erased by a storm 600 miles from Glastonbury. Why does this keep happening on this trail?
So let me pull all of this together. Let me lay the cases side by side and you tell me what you see. A 66 years old retired nurse who did everything right. An 8-year-old girl in a red coat. A 74-year-old expert woodsman who couldn't possibly get lost, and a man who vanished off a moving bus, a woman who walked back to camp to change her clothes, a 6-year-old boy playing a game on Father's Day. Different decades, different ages, different states. 600 miles between the ends of it.
And yet the same handful of cursed mountains, over and over, bodies found in ground that had already been searched twice now that we've counted. Storms and rain that kill the scent at the exact worst moment, again and again. Stretches where the signal dies and the compass spins. And, layered underneath all of it, centuries of warnings from the people who knew this land first, the ones who looked at these specific mountains and said simply, do not go there. Every single one of these cases has an official file, and every single one of those files lands on the same word. Accident, misadventure, lost. And here's the honest truth. Taken one at a time, each of those explanations is probably correct. The dense forest, the dead zone, the bad luck, the wrong turn, the storm. There is a rational answer for every case in isolation. But that's the trick, isn't it? That's the thing about a pattern. Every individual piece of it looks like a coincidence. So here's the only question I actually want to leave you holding tonight. How many times does it get to be just an accident before it starts being a pattern? I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm not selling you a monster or a portal or a curse. I'm just laying the files on the table. You're the one who gets to decide what they add up to. And the thing I really need you to understand is that this is not history. This is not a campfire story about the distant past. The Appalachian Trail is busier right now, today, than it has ever been in its entire existence. Those dead zones are still dead. Those cursed stretches are still right there on the map, exactly where they've always been. And people still walk into them and don't always walk back out. So if you ever do hike it, and you genuinely should, because it is one of the most beautiful places in this entire country, and I don't want fear to be the only thing you take from this, then please do these things. Carry a satellite messenger, not just a phone. A phone is a brick out there, and Jerry Largay proved it with 11 unanswered texts. Tell someone your exact route and your exact timeline. And if you ever feel that forest start to close in around you, if you turn around and the trail is gone, stop walking. Stay exactly where you are, because almost everyone who dies out there dies while they're trying to find their own way back. Movement is what kills you. Jerry kept moving, so did Frida, so did a 74-year-old woodsman who knew better. Jerry Largay was found because she wrote it down. She handed us her own ending from inside that tent. The others weren't so generous. They left a red coat that nobody ever found, a single rifle cartridge in a stream, an empty seat on a bus, a red shirt that 1,000 soldiers couldn't turn up,
the trail
a body
is
in
still
an open
out there
field
tonight.
that everyone
still
swore
beautiful,
they had already
still crowded,
searched.
still going quiet and going dark in all the same places it always has. The same mountains the old people told us to stay off of. And it's still waiting the way it always has for the next careful, prepared, experienced person to take one small, ordinary, wrong step off the path. Do not be the next entry in this file. I'll see you in the next one.